little bit outside the box. Think of ways to easily add organic matter to your soil without all the work, without the need for a wheelbarrow and a compost pile, without a pitchfork. All you need are a pair of shears or scissors, depending on what you want to use, a nice pair of gloves, and spend a few hours in the morning before the sun comes up in your beautiful garden, simply chopping and dropping as you prune, or chop, move, and drop. Hello, and welcome back to Starkey Farmstead. We're going to discuss some ways that you can easily add back nutrients right to your soil, building up organic matter around your plants without having to use heavy equipment, compost, or vermicompost. What am I talking about, guys? The chop and drop technique. Now, permaculture really pushes this idea and this technique, and they should. It is a phenomenal way for you to add organic matter right back to your soil in the spot that your plant is growing. And the way that you do that is basically when you find weeds in your garden, and we all know that a weed is simply a plant growing in an incorrect place. So when you find a weed in your garden, you can pull it up, turn it over, and leave it right there. Now that's going to add nitrogen to your soil and increase biodiversity for your microorganisms to eat. It's also going to add organic matter. The next thing that you can do is you can actually cut the leaves of things like comfrey, dandelions, nettles, and you can move them in a chop and drop move method. Now guys, let's talk real quick before we go any further. The only time that you do not want to use a chop and drop technique, the chop and drop or the chop, move and drop technique, is if the plant is diseased or the roots are diseased. And in that instance, the best thing that you can do is move it out of your garden. Now, a lot of people will tell you bag it, get it off of your property, or burn it. But for us, because we're sustainable and we're all about capturing carbon, not emitting it, what we do with diseased plants or pest-ridden plants when we're pruning or we're weeding is we take them to the biochar pit. You can see here in our biochar pit, right here on the top, are tomato plants. Those tomato plants had disease. That's why I pulled them up. So rather than bag them and get them off the property, you absolutely cannot compost them. I am going to turn them into biochar. So one of the greatest things about the biochar pit is simply that I can use diseased or pest-ridden plants and turn them back into a soil amendment that literally will keep giving to me, to my children, my grandchildren, and anyone else that purchases this property after us. It will continue to give nutrients to the soil for many, many generations. So if you've not looked into biochar, I highly suggest you do your research. This might be an option for you to get rid of things that are diseased. So here you can see some examples of what the chop and drop method actually looks like. All of the brown on the ground are the leaves from the pumpkin. When I'm pruning, I come and I cut them and drop them right there. We do the exact same thing with the okra. The reason we apply the chop and drop method from the plant to the soil underneath it is very simple. All the nutrients, all the minerals, all the micronutrients that plant pulled from the soil to grow itself, when I'm pruning and I chop and drop it, it's going to biodegrade right back into the soil, adding back in, obviously, the nutrients that plant needs to thrive. So rather than moving it to a compost pile or to a vermicompost system, I leave it right there. Like you saw with the okra plants, they biodegrade extremely fast if you're in a humid, hot climate like Southeast Louisiana, which is why I'm standing in the shade under Mother Oak behind me, because it's 101 degrees right now and I'm sweating in the shade. So I don't want to be in that direct sun. Now, one of my personal favorite plants to use the chop, move, and drop method with is comfrey. And the reason is I can chop this, move it underneath like my tomato plants, which love it, and drop it right there. Give it 3 or 4 weeks and it's really gonna be brown, brittle, and breaking up. Give it another 4 weeks and the micronutrients in this plant are now being absorbed into the soil every time it rains, every time I water, and my tomatoes are pulling it up without the extra steps of me turning this into a foliar spray, which if you guys haven't seen our video on making your own potassium foliar sprays with comfrey, you absolutely should. Comfrey is a powerhouse. It is a powerhouse. It literally should be in every backyard garden in the world. There is nothing negative I can say about this plant. Nothing at all. It's an amazing plant. But one of the things I use it most for, if I'm not feeding it to my livestock or making tinctures and teas out of it, I'm chopping it, moving it, and dropping it all over my property. Borage is another, or barrage, however you want to say it. There are several plants that really benefit. And I can tell you this, if you've not really gotten down companion planting well, but you like herbs, figure out which herbs go with which vegetables. You can chop from your herbs, move them to the vegetables that they really plant well with, and drop it right there on the soil underneath that vegetable. And over time, it's like you planted it side by side. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Ring your notification bell. The more people that do that, the more people see our videos with this kind of information. Now, I know people think chop and drop is a new technique that's been developed over the last couple of years. My 81-year-old dad was teaching me this when I was 4 years old, and he learned it from his great-grandfather. So that's at least 150 years. This is not a new concept, but somehow we've lost it. When chemical fertilizers came out, people stopped caring about the soil and just about growing food. You can't separate the two, guys. Get out there, chop and drop your heart out. You will thank me later.